Pushpin, don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling love stories. The first night we spent together was nothing like I had imagined. I had pictured soft whispers, gentle touches, and a quiet kind of closeness that would make my heart flutter. But from the moment he stepped into the room, everything shifted. There was an intensity in his gaze that I couldn't ignore, a fire that made my skin tingle and my breath catch in ways I had never experienced. He didn't just look at me, he seemed to see through me, into every hidden thought, every unspoken desire, every secret I hadn't even admitted to myself. I remember the way he approached, slow and deliberate, like a storm moving in with quiet inevitability. His hand brushed mine, and it felt electric, as if the simple touch had unlocked something deep inside me. I tried to stay composed, tried to act casual, but my pulse betrayed me. I could feel it pounding in my ears, in my chest, in my fingertips. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. And instead of teasing or asking, he simply smiled, a curve of lips that promised trouble and thrill in equal measure. He leaned closer, his voice low and smooth, almost hypnotic. "Tonight," he whispered, "I'm going to drive you crazy." There was no room for misunderstanding in that sentence. It wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a joke. It was a promise. And somewhere deep down, I knew that this promise would change me, reshape the way I felt about myself, about him, about what it meant to surrender, not just to desire, but to trust, to connection, to the unpredictable chaos of love. The room around us seemed to blur. The lights softened, shadows dancing across the walls as if celebrating the tension that built between us. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he meant, to protest the heat rising inside me, but the words died in my throat. All I could do was watch, captivated, as he drew nearer, as his presence seemed to pull me toward him like a current I couldn't resist. His hand found my cheek, warm and firm, and in that instant, the world fell away. There was nothing but us, nothing but the quiet, thrilling hum of anticipation that wrapped around us like silk. We moved closer, and time slowed, each second stretching into eternity. The first kiss was gentle, exploratory, yet charged with a tension that made my entire body alert. I could feel the promise in it, the promise of more, of everything he had hinted at with that confident, daring look. He wasn't holding back, not even a little, and neither could I. It was as if the walls around my heart had crumbled, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and exhilarated all at once. As the night unfolded, each moment built upon the last, a symphony of emotions, touches, and whispered words. Laughter and sighs mingled, creating a rhythm that was uniquely ours. And yet, beneath the playful, thrilling surface, there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something neither of us had named but both felt. It was the beginning of a bond that promised transformation, that hinted at love and longing in equal measure, that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. That night had opened doors inside me I didn't even know existed, and he had become the key. It wasn't just desire or attraction, it was something more profound, more consuming. And as I watched him, sleeping beside me, a faint smile playing on his lips, I knew that this was only the beginning. The night had promised madness, and it had delivered, but it had also promised something far more enduring, a love that would challenge me, thrill me, and change everything forever. The morning after our first night together was surreal. Sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, painting golden streaks across the room, and for a moment, I forgot where I was, who I was, and what had just happened. Then I turned, and there he was, sleeping with that infuriatingly calm expression, one arm draped across the pillow, the other resting lightly on the edge of the bed. My heart skipped, not with fear or hesitation, but with a strange, electrifying certainty. Nothing could ever feel ordinary again. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to see if the warmth between us from the night before lingered in the soft curve of his shoulder or the steady rise and fall of his chest. But I hesitated, suddenly shy in the bright morning light, my fingers hovering just above his skin. It was ridiculous. I had surrendered to him completely the night before, had let myself melt into him without resistance, but now, faced with the quiet reality of him in the daytime, I felt an almost childlike hesitation. He stirred at my gaze, eyelids fluttering open to reveal the same intensity, the same smoldering look that had haunted my dreams. "You're awake," he murmured, voice husky, teasing, but with an undertone that suggested he had been aware of every thought running through my mind since the moment I opened my eyes. There was no anger, no awkwardness, only that magnetic confidence that drew me closer even when I tried to pull away. I smiled weakly, trying to play it cool, but he tilted his head slightly, studying me like a painter assessing a canvas, and my facade crumbled entirely. "You look different in the light," he said, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. Different. That was the understatement of the century. He always saw more than what anyone else could, more than what I allowed anyone else to see. And somehow, instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, I felt alive. Alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. His hand found mine again, fingers intertwining naturally as if we had always belonged together, and the electricity from the night before surged back tenfold. Breakfast came and went without much conversation. We sat side by side, stealing glances, occasionally brushing hands, and laughing softly at small things that neither of us could quite remember later. Words felt inadequate, they were unnecessary when every touch, every look, conveyed more than any sentence could. And yet, beneath the laughter and playful nudges, there was an undeniable tension, a craving that pulsed between us like a current waiting for release. The night had set a standard that daylight only emphasized. This connection wasn't fleeting, it was consuming, unpredictable, and irresistible. Later, we wandered through the city, hand in hand, as if testing the world together. People passed by, oblivious to the unspoken bond between us, but each shared smile, each subtle brush of fingers, felt like a secret we owned alone. He whispered small, careless compliments that made my heart thrum, and I caught myself leaning closer, eager for even the smallest touch. Everywhere we went, the intensity followed us like a shadow, quiet but undeniable, growing with every glance, every subtle brush of skin against skin. By mid-afternoon, we found ourselves in a quiet park, a hidden corner where sunlight dappled through the trees, creating a private sanctuary in the midst of the bustling city. He sat on a bench, and I settled next to him, close enough that our legs brushed, close enough that the warmth radiating from his body seemed to envelop me. He reached for my hair, tucking a stray strand behind my ear, and the simple gesture sent shivers down my spine. There was a patience in him, a deliberate control that only heightened the anticipation simmering between us. It was maddening, intoxicating, and entirely irresistible. "Do you ever think about last night?" he asked, his voice low, almost contemplative, and I could feel the tension coil tighter around us. I nodded, words failing me, and he chuckled softly, a sound that made my knees weaken. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted, leaning closer until his lips nearly brushed my ear. "Every second, every touch, every whisper, I relive it. And I want more. More." The word was a promise, a warning, and a thrill all at once. My breath hitched, and I realized that I wanted it too, more, always more, and I didn't even care what the consequences might be. As the afternoon melted into evening, the intensity didn't waver. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, every laugh carried an unspoken question: how far could we go before the world caught up to us? There was an intimacy developing beyond the physical, something deeper than desire alone. It was the way he listened to me, really listened, as if my thoughts mattered more than anything else. It was the way I trusted him, completely and without reservation, even when logic screamed caution. That trust, that surrender, was more intoxicating than any kiss, any touch, any whispered promise. By the time night returned, wrapping the city in a soft, forgiving darkness, I realized we had crossed an invisible threshold. We had moved beyond curiosity, beyond hesitation, beyond the thrill of the unknown. We were entwined, not just in body, but in mind, in emotion, in something raw and undeniable. And as we returned to the apartment, the memory of the first night still fresh, I knew that this was only the beginning. He had promised to drive me crazy, and with every heartbeat, with every stolen glance, with every brush of fingers, he was keeping that promise, and changing me in ways I had never anticipated. The night that followed wasn't just a repeat of the first, it was a deeper exploration, a journey into trust, passion, and the fragile, exhilarating edges of desire. Every kiss lingered longer, every touch sent shivers through places I hadn't known could feel so intensely. And in the quiet moments between chaos and thrill, I discovered something unexpected. This wasn't just about surrender, or desire, or lust. It was about connection, about vulnerability, about realizing that one night could change everything, not just for a fleeting moment, but forever. And as I finally drifted into sleep, his presence a comforting weight beside me, I knew without doubt that I would never be the same again. He had promised to drive me crazy, and he had begun. The rest of our story, our intense, unpredictable, life-altering story, was waiting, and I was ready to follow wherever it led. The days that followed our first night together were a blur of stolen moments, lingering touches, and a quiet but undeniable pull that neither of us could resist. Every time I thought I had a handle on my feelings, he would do something small, a glance that lingered too long, a hand brushing mine in passing, a low murmur of my name, that sent my heart racing and left me dizzy with anticipation. It was as if he had mapped out every corner of my mind and emotions, and each day he discovered new ways to unravel me, to make me crave him even more. He had this way of showing up when I least expected it, leaning against the doorframe with that half-smile that promised mischief and desire all at once. I tried to act casual, to pretend that I wasn't completely captivated, but he always caught me off guard. Once, as I was sipping coffee in the quiet of the morning, he slid silently beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders, and whispered, "You're impossible to resist." Impossible to resist. That wasn't even the half of it. I realized then that I didn't want to resist. Not him, not any of this, not the way my entire being seemed to respond to his presence. Our conversations became a game of push and pull, teasing and surrendering, each word carrying weight and electricity. He had a way of asking questions that felt innocuous at first, but beneath the surface lay intent, curiosity, and desire. "Do you trust me?" he asked one evening as we walked through the park, the city lights flickering around us. I hesitated, my heart fluttering, unsure if I was ready to admit just how much I already did. But the look in his eyes, steady and unwavering, made the words tumble out before I could stop them, completely. And in that moment, something shifted. It was a surrender not of body alone, but of heart, mind, and soul, and it thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. Evenings became our secret territory. The city might have carried on outside, busy and indifferent, but in our shared moments, time seemed to stretch and fold around us. One night, we stayed on the balcony, the warm summer air brushing against our skin, and he took my hand, holding it as though he was anchoring me to him. "I could stay here forever," he murmured. I leaned into him instinctively, feeling the steady heat of his body against mine, the rhythm of his heartbeat syncing with mine. There was safety in it, even amidst the wild, intoxicating chaos of desire he stirred in me. But it wasn't all quiet moments and whispered promises. There was a tension beneath the surface, a wild, unspoken energy that crackled whenever we were near. One evening, while cooking together, our hands collided over a knife, fingers brushing, and the air between us shifted. We froze, looking at each other, breaths hitching. Then he leaned in, his voice low and teasing, "You do this to me on purpose, don't you?" I laughed nervously, heart hammering, and he smiled that maddening smile, as if he had won a silent battle we hadn't even known we were fighting. That tension became our signature, a game of anticipation and surrender that left me dizzy, exhilarated, and entirely captivated. I found myself thinking about him constantly, replaying moments, touches, words, and glances in my mind. Even in the middle of work, my thoughts drifted to the curve of his smile, the depth of his gaze, the way his fingers felt entwined with mine. Every time he sent a simple text, my pulse would quicken, thinking of you. That was all it took, just 4 words, but it was enough to make my day spin in a delicious, dizzying whirl of longing. And he seemed to know it, using those small, deliberate gestures to keep me off balance, to remind me that he was always close, even when he wasn't physically present. One night, he surprised me at the apartment, carrying a single rose and that mischievous glint in his eyes that had me melting before I even realized what was happening. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing it to me with a gentle reverence that made my fingers tremble as I took it. The scent of the rose mingled with the faint perfume lingering from his cologne, creating a heady, intoxicating mix. We didn't speak much after that. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, we sat together on the sofa, close enough that our thighs brushed, and let the silence speak, letting the moments stretch, heavy with unspoken promises and desires. He had a way of reading me better than I read myself. Once, while I was nervously fiddling with a bracelet, he caught my hand mid-motion and held it, eyes searching mine. "You don't have to hide from me," he said, voice soft but insistent. And I realized I hadn't been hiding intentionally, I had just been afraid of how completely I could feel, how deeply I could fall, how thoroughly he could consume me without even touching me. And yet, in that moment, I let go of every hesitation, every fear. I trusted him completely, and it was the most liberating, terrifying, thrilling sensation I had ever known. Even with the growing intimacy, there was a raw unpredictability about him that kept me constantly on edge. I never knew when he would appear, when he would speak a word that would send shivers down my spine, when he would make me laugh so hard I forgot myself completely. And yet, that unpredictability only drew me in further, made me crave him more, made every ordinary moment feel extraordinary simply because he was in it. Every touch, every look, every shared secret built a tension that seemed impossible to contain, as though the universe itself had conspired to keep us on the edge, longing and anticipating what was next. By the time another night arrived, bringing with it a quiet darkness and the soft hum of the city below, I realized that my life had changed irrevocably. I wasn't the same person who had nervously stepped into that apartment days ago. I was bolder, more aware, more alive, entirely consumed by him and the world we were creating together. And as he took my hand once again, leading me toward the bedroom, that same intense, smoldering promise in his eyes, I knew the journey was far from over. He had vowed to drive me crazy, and with every passing day, every stolen glance, every whispered word, he was keeping that promise, pushing me further into a world of desire, connection, and love that I had never imagined could exist. And so we crossed the threshold together, hearts beating in tandem, bodies drawn to one another as if by magnetism, ready to explore not just the madness of desire, but the deeper, more thrilling connection that had taken root in the spaces between us. The first night had been just the beginning. Part of a story that was unfolding, unpredictable and intoxicating, and I knew with certainty that no matter what came next, I would follow him, into chaos, into passion, into love, and into whatever world he promised to show me next. The days continued to blur together in a haze of desire, laughter, and stolen moments, yet each encounter felt like the first time all over again. I had grown used to the way he could enter a room and instantly command attention, not through force but through presence. The magnetic pull he had over me was undeniable. Even when he was silent, I felt the weight of him, the promise of him, pressing into my thoughts and making every other sound, every other color fade away. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and absolutely irresistible. One afternoon, as we walked through the quiet streets near the river, he suddenly stopped, pulling me gently to face him. His expression softened, and for the first time in days, the playful spark in his eyes was accompanied by a seriousness that made my heart skip. "You've changed," he said quietly, studying me like he was trying to memorize every line of my face, every twitch of emotion. "Since that first night, I see it in you, the way you move, the way you speak, the way you let yourself feel. You've surrendered, haven't you?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Surrendered. The word lingered between us, heavier than any physical touch. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and his smile returned, a mixture of triumph and tenderness. We continued walking, but the air between us had shifted. The teasing tension that had been constant now mingled with something more profound, something that felt almost sacred. Every brush of his fingers against mine sent a shiver up my spine, every glance left me dizzy, every touch reminded me that I had given myself over completely. And yet, with that surrender came a new kind of vulnerability, one that made me aware of how much power he had over me, not in a controlling way, but in the way a storm has power over a landscape, awe-inspiring, consuming, impossible to resist. That night, back in the apartment, the city lights casting long shadows through the windows, we found ourselves in the living room, sitting close but not touching. Silence stretched between us, comfortable yet charged, and I realized how rare and precious these quiet moments were. He reached out slowly, tracing the line of my jaw with his fingers, and I leaned into the touch without hesitation. It wasn't just a caress, it was a statement, a confirmation that we were both here, fully aware, fully present, fully entwined in this dangerous, exhilarating connection. You know, he murmured, voice low and intimate, this isn't just desire anymore. I can feel it, something deeper. And I think you feel it too. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening, because he was right. Desire alone couldn't explain the way my heart ached when he was away, or the way I thought about him constantly, or the strange, thrilling fear of losing myself in him completely. It was bigger than lust, it was a force that pulled us together, demanding acknowledgement, surrender, and trust. He leaned closer, his lips brushing against my temple, and whispered my name with a softness that made my knees weak. Do you trust me? The question, simple as it was, carried weight now. Not just the thrill of the unknown, but the acknowledgement that what we were building could change everything. And again, I felt the truth in me rising to the surface. I did. I trusted him completely, with every part of myself, and the admission made my pulse race in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. We moved to the balcony, letting the cool night air wash over us. The city below continued its indifferent hum, but up here, the world felt suspended, and I felt as though time itself had slowed to allow this moment to exist forever. He held me close, one arm around my waist, the other brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I realized that I could stay like this endlessly, enveloped in his presence, consumed by the safety and chaos he brought at once. Every heartbeat, every touch, every whispered word was a thread weaving us closer together, binding us in ways that went far beyond mere attraction. And yet, even in the intimacy of the night, there was an edge to him, a spark of unpredictability that kept me on my toes. A playful smile, a teasing glance, the brush of his fingers across my skin, it was thrilling, maddening, and impossible to ignore. He knew exactly how to draw me in, how to keep me off balance, how to make every moment feel electric and alive. It was as if he had mastered the art of knowing exactly what I wanted before I did, and that knowledge only deepened the connection, made it richer, more consuming. Later, inside, the tension between us transformed into something deeper, more profound. It wasn't just about desire or flirtation anymore, it was about trust, about vulnerability, about recognizing that two people could meet and change each other entirely in ways that neither had anticipated. Every glance held promise, every touch whispered secrets, every sigh hinted at the intensity of what we were creating together. And as he leaned back, holding me close, I realized that the bond we were forging was unstoppable, unshakable, and thrilling beyond anything I had imagined. I noticed then, with a strange clarity, that this connection had begun to affect the way I saw the world. Colors seemed sharper, sounds more vibrant, emotions more intense. He had awakened something in me, a fire that was both thrilling and terrifying, a hunger that could not be quenched by anything but his presence. And I knew that no matter how chaotic or unpredictable this journey became, I was ready to follow him, to surrender to the madness, the thrill, and the love that had taken root between us so fiercely. As the night drew to a close, we sat together in the quiet glow of the city lights, and I realized that every promise, every word, every stolen moment was building toward something inevitable. He had vowed to drive me crazy, and with every heartbeat, every whispered word, every intentional touch, he was keeping that promise. But now, it was no longer just about desire or temptation, it was about connection, about intimacy, about the dangerous, thrilling edge where passion meets trust. And in that space, I found myself falling further, deeper, and more completely than I had ever imagined possible. And as I finally drifted into a restless sleep, his arms wrapped around me protectively, I understood that the nights ahead would continue to test us, thrill us, and change us forever. The first night had been a spark, the following days a slow burn, and now, as our story unfolded, I knew that nothing would ever be ordinary again. He had promised me madness, and he had delivered, but he had also promised something far greater, a love that would transform every part of me, forever. The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of the city outside and the warmth of his body pressed against mine. The night had left traces on my skin, not just the memory of touches and whispered words, but a sense of being irrevocably altered, reshaped by the intensity of what we shared. He stirred beside me, eyes half open, watching me with a smile that was equal parts mischief and tenderness, and I realized that nothing in my life had ever felt this thrilling or terrifyingly beautiful. The world outside might have continued in its ordinary rhythm, but here, in this space, time seemed suspended, measured only by our breaths, our heartbeats, our shared silence. I shifted slightly, trying not to wake him fully, but he caught my movement immediately, pulling me closer. "Morning," he whispered, his voice low and smooth, brushing against my ear like a caress. I couldn't stop the smile that formed on my lips, a blend of affection and desire, and he chuckled softly, the sound vibrating through me in a way that made every nerve feel alive. "You're impossible," he said, but it wasn't a complaint, it was an observation, one I felt in the depths of my soul. I had surrendered completely, and he seemed both thrilled and gently victorious in the knowledge that I could not resist him, nor did I want to. Breakfast was a quiet affair, though neither of us could seem to resist the small gestures that communicated far more than words ever could. A hand brushing against mine across the table, a glance that lingered too long, a soft laugh shared at something only the two of us seemed to understand. These little moments had become a language of their own, one that bound us together in ways that were subtle but unbreakable. And yet, beneath the gentle familiarity, there remained an undercurrent of tension, a thrilling unpredictability that kept me on edge, craving the next moment, the next spark that would set my heart racing. Later in the afternoon, he suggested a walk along the river, a spontaneous idea that carried the promise of adventure and closeness. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and we walked side by side, fingers brushing occasionally, sharing quiet observations about the world around us. But every so often, his hand would find mine deliberately, intertwining fingers, and the simple act carried a weight that neither of us could ignore. It was a touch that spoke of trust, of longing, of a connection that had grown too strong to be denied. We stopped at a small park, hidden among tall buildings, where the air was fresh and the noise of the city faded into a soft murmur. He turned to me suddenly, his gaze intense, searching. "Do you feel it too?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, words failing me, because what I felt went beyond explanation. It wasn't just desire, it was a pull, a tether, a magnetic force that made the thought of being apart unbearable. He smiled, that dangerous, tantalizing smile, and stepped closer, closing the distance until I could feel his breath against my skin. Every instinct in me screamed to give in, to surrender, to let the world disappear and exist only in the space we shared. That evening, we returned to the apartment, the city now cloaked in the quiet hush of night. There was a weight to the air, a charged anticipation that made my heart pound and my stomach twist with excitement. He moved with that effortless confidence, the kind that made every action deliberate, every gesture meaningful. I watched him, captivated, realizing that my desire for him went beyond attraction, it was fascination, obsession, and an undeniable longing to be near him in every possible way. We spent hours talking, sharing stories from our pasts, confessions and secrets that we had never told anyone else. Each revelation, each laugh, each shared memory brought us closer, building a foundation of intimacy that was both thrilling and grounding. He listened with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way I had never experienced before, as though every word mattered, every emotion was significant, and every moment together was a step toward a connection that could withstand anything. And in those moments, I realized that what we were building was more than passion, it was something enduring, something that promised a depth I had never dared to hope for. As the night deepened, he pulled me close, and we sat together on the sofa, limbs entwined, breathing in rhythm. The city outside seemed distant, irrelevant, as if it existed only to fade away while we existed in our own perfect, suspended world. He brushed a hand along my arm, and I felt a thrill that was both electric and comforting. "I want you to know," he said, voice low and earnest, "that it's more than just the nights, more than just the desire. I feel it. You feel it too, don't you?" I nodded, unable to speak, because the truth was undeniable. I had felt it from the first moment, from the first touch, from the first night. And now, every passing day confirmed it. This connection was irrevocable, intoxicating, and utterly consuming. Later, as we lay together, talking in whispers, I felt a surge of emotion I could barely contain. There was joy, there was longing, there was a fear of losing this fragile, beautiful thing we had found in each other. And yet, beneath it all, there was an excitement, a thrill, a certainty that no matter what challenges or chaos the world might throw at us, we would face it together. He had promised to drive me crazy, and with every passing day, every shared glance, every whispered word, he was keeping that promise, but in a way that was shaping me, changing me, making me bolder, more alive, and more completely his than I had ever imagined possible. That night ended not with the fiery intensity of the first, nor the teasing anticipation of the days that followed, but with a quiet, profound intimacy that left me feeling vulnerable, cherished, and entirely captivated. I realized that our story wasn't just about passion or desire, it was about trust, surrender, and the extraordinary magic of two people finding themselves completely in each other. And as I drifted into sleep, his presence a comforting weight beside me, I knew that this was only the beginning. The nights ahead promised more thrills, more discoveries, more surrender, and I was ready for every moment of it. By the time dawn arrived, painting the city in soft, forgiving light, I felt an undeniable certainty, nothing would ever be the same again. Every touch, every word, every shared glance had altered the trajectory of my life. He had promised madness, and he had delivered, but he had also promised something far greater, a love that was deep, consuming, and transformative, capable of reshaping every part of me. And in that quiet, golden morning, I surrendered fully, not just to the thrill, but to the depth of what we were building together, knowing that the story we were writing would continue to change us forever. The following days seemed to blur into a seamless rhythm of anticipation, intimacy, and the intoxicating chaos that had become our shared world. Every glance, every brush of skin, every soft murmur carried a weight I hadn't anticipated, an intensity that made ordinary moments feel electric. I found myself thinking about him constantly, the memory of his touch, his voice, his presence lingering like a warm shadow even when he wasn't near. It was maddening, addictive, and entirely consuming. And I realized, with a thrill I couldn't deny, that I didn't want it any other way. One afternoon, he appeared at my apartment unexpectedly, leaning casually against the doorway with that infuriatingly confident smile. "You've been avoiding me," he teased, though the amusement in his eyes betrayed a deeper curiosity. I laughed nervously, trying to act casual, but my pulse betrayed me. He stepped inside before I could protest, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a promise. There was an ease in the way he moved, an unspoken understanding between us that made the world outside fade away entirely. And once again, I was reminded that my life had changed irreversibly, and I had no desire to go back to the way it had been. He approached slowly, giving me space while somehow filling the room completely with his presence. When he finally reached me, he brushed a strand of hair from my face, the simple gesture sending shivers down my spine. "I missed you," he murmured, and the words, though ordinary on the surface, carried a weight that made my chest ache. I wanted to answer, to tell him how much I had thought about him, how every moment apart felt incomplete, but my voice faltered, and instead he leaned closer, letting his eyes speak for him. And in that gaze, I found a warmth and intensity that made my heart race, a reminder of the undeniable connection we shared. The afternoon stretched on with easy intimacy. We cooked together, laughing over minor mishaps and teasing one another endlessly, yet beneath the surface, the tension simmered, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Every accidental brush of fingers, every deliberate glance, every soft laugh carried an electricity that made my entire body hum. And though we moved slowly, savoring the moments, there was a pulse of urgency beneath it all, a constant, simmering energy that reminded me of the promise he had made on our first night, the one that had set everything in motion. He was determined to drive me crazy, and with each passing day, he succeeded with an effortless mastery that left me both dizzy and enthralled. As evening fell, we retreated to the balcony, letting the fading sunlight cast warm patterns across our skin. The city below carried on unaware of the intensity that existed above, in our secluded world. He took my hand, intertwining fingers with his, and the simple contact sent waves of anticipation and delight coursing through me. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked softly, his voice almost drowned out by the faint hum of traffic below. I nodded, unable to deny it. It was more than desire, more than attraction, it was a connection that had rooted itself so deeply, so completely, that it no longer mattered whether we tried to define it. It simply existed, undeniable and intoxicating. We stayed there for what felt like hours, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories, dreams, fears, and laughter. Every word, every touch, every quiet moment together built layers of intimacy that were as thrilling as they were comforting. He had a way of making me feel seen, truly seen, in a way no one else ever had. And in that recognition, I felt a vulnerability I had never allowed anyone to witness, a surrender that went far beyond physical attraction. It was a meeting of souls, wrapped in the guise of desire, and it thrilled me to my core. Later, inside, he pulled me close, the city lights casting long, soft shadows across the room. Our proximity alone created a tension that was almost unbearable, a delicious, maddening pull that left me yearning for more even as I feared what more might mean. Every brush of his fingers against my skin, every whispered word, every lingering gaze was a reminder that we were entangled in something far greater than a fleeting fling. This was obsession, connection, and passion woven together into a tapestry I could not, and would not, escape. And yet, there was safety in it, a strange balance between exhilaration and comfort that made the intensity feel sustainable, even desirable. We talked late into the night, sharing confessions, secrets, and stories that had remained locked inside us for years. Each revelation drew us closer, forging trust and intimacy that neither of us had anticipated but both desperately craved. I realized that every moment with him was a step further into a world I had never known, a world where vulnerability was not weakness, where desire was intertwined with trust, and where love, wild, consuming, and transformative, was not just possible, but inevitable. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. He drew me close, his hands firm yet gentle, and whispered my name, his voice a low, intoxicating promise. The tension between us coiled tighter, a living thing that demanded release, but I realized it was more than that, it was the culmination of every touch, every glance, every heartbeat we had shared. He had succeeded in his promise to drive me crazy, yes, but he had also opened the door to something far deeper, something that made me ache not just for him, but for the bond we were creating, for the love that was growing in ways neither of us could yet fully comprehend. And as I finally surrendered to sleep, his arms wrapped securely around me, I felt the full weight of what had begun. The nights, the days, the stolen moments, they were no longer just about desire. They were about connection, intimacy, and a love that was daring, unpredictable, and life-altering. He had promised madness, and he delivered, but he had also promised transformation, and with every glance, every touch, every whispered word, he was keeping that promise as well. By dawn, I woke to the soft hum of the city and the warmth of his presence beside me, and I knew with certainty that nothing in my life would ever be the same. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every shared glance had altered me, reshaped me, and pulled me irrevocably into a world where love, passion, and connection were intertwined so completely that I could no longer imagine life without it. He had promised to drive me crazy, and he had begun, but what he had truly delivered was far more powerful, a love that was transformative, consuming, and eternal, waiting for us to explore its depths together. The days that followed carried a quiet intensity, a simmering tension that neither of us could ignore. It wasn't just the desire that burned between us, it was something far deeper, something that tangled our hearts, our minds, and our very souls in ways I had never anticipated. Every time he looked at me, I felt as though he could read the corners of my mind, the unspoken desires, the fears I hadn't yet admitted even to myself. And every time our hands brushed or our eyes met, I realized that I had surrendered to him completely, not just in body but in spirit. One afternoon, he appeared unexpectedly at my door, that familiar mischievous grin playing on his lips. I laughed softly at his perfect timing, though my heart was pounding beneath my ribs. "You're relentless," I said, but he only shrugged, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he replied, his voice low and magnetic, sending a shiver down my spine. I wanted to argue, to claim that I was in control, but the truth was undeniable, I had no control, and I didn't want it. He had claimed that part of me long ago, and I was powerless to resist. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, and for a moment, we just stood there, studying one another. The air between us was thick with unspoken promises, with tension that hummed like electricity. His eyes traced my face, lingering on my lips, my eyes, the subtle curve of my cheek, and I felt exposed in a way that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. I realized then that our connection was no longer a choice, it had become a force, pulling us together with relentless, magnetic power. That evening, we decided to walk along the quiet streets near the river, the city bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. There was an intimacy in the silence, in the shared glances, in the simple touch of our fingers intertwined. Every so often, he would lean close, whispering something playful or teasing into my ear, and I would feel my heart flutter in ways I hadn't known were possible. There was a rhythm to our interactions, a dance that neither of us had rehearsed, yet it felt natural, inevitable, and inescapable. We stopped at a small, secluded park, hidden among the buildings, where the world seemed to fade away. He took my hand, holding it tightly, and his eyes searched mine with a depth that made my chest ache. "I need to know," he said softly, his voice almost vulnerable, "that this isn't just fleeting for you. That you feel it as deeply as I do." I nodded, unable to find words, because what I felt went far beyond simple explanation. It was desire, yes, but it was also trust, connection, and an ache for a bond that neither of us could ignore. And in that acknowledgement, I felt an overwhelming surge of certainty. I was his, completely, irrevocably, and he was mine. That night, back in the apartment, the tension had reached a new height. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every whispered word carried weight. We moved together seamlessly, our proximity alone sparking anticipation that made every nerve in my body hum. There was a sense of urgency now, a thrilling edge to our interactions that left me dizzy and exhilarated. He had mastered the art of driving me crazy, of keeping me on the precipice of desire, and I found myself craving it, even as I feared how far we would go. Hours passed in a haze of conversation, laughter, and quiet, intimate touches that left us both breathless. He had a way of reading me so perfectly, of knowing exactly when to tease, when to comfort, when to push, and when to hold back. It was maddening, addictive, and utterly intoxicating. And as the night deepened, I realized that this was more than desire, it was a meeting of minds, hearts, and souls that had been waiting for each other in ways neither of us had fully understood until now. We sat together on the balcony, the cool night air brushing our skin, the city lights stretching endlessly before us. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, drawing me close, and for the first time, we allowed ourselves to be completely silent, simply existing in each other's presence. That silence carried more meaning than any words could, a shared understanding that what we had was rare, fragile, and infinitely precious. And as I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, I felt a sense of peace I had never known, even amidst the storm of passion and desire that had defined our journey so far. But even in the quiet, there was an undercurrent of tension, a thrilling unpredictability that kept me on edge. He leaned down suddenly, pressing a soft kiss to my temple, and whispered my name. The simple act sent a shiver through me, reminding me of the magnetic pull he had over me, the power he held to unravel me with a single touch. I realized then that the promise he had made on our first night, to drive me crazy, was no longer just about desire. It was about transformation, about pushing me to feel, to surrender, to embrace every part of myself that had been dormant until he arrived. Later, inside, we sat on the sofa, limbs intertwined, the city outside fading into irrelevance. Every brush of his fingers against my skin, every lingering gaze, every low murmur of my name was a thread weaving us closer together, binding us in ways I had never imagined possible. He had opened doors within me I didn't even know existed, revealing depths of passion, trust, and vulnerability I had never dared explore. And I surrendered to it fully, knowing that this connection, this love, was transforming me in ways both thrilling and terrifying. As the clock neared midnight, I felt the culmination of every touch, every glance, every whispered word. The tension between us had become almost unbearable, a living thing coiled tightly, demanding release. And yet, it was more than just the physical, it was the emotional, the mental, the spiritual surrender that made each moment so intense, so consuming, so unforgettable. He had promised madness, and he delivered, but he had also promised transformation, and with every heartbeat, every glance, every soft murmur, he kept that promise in ways that left me dizzy, exhilarated, and completely captivated. By the time dawn approached, casting a soft glow over the city, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. Every stolen glance, every lingering touch, every whispered word had reshaped me, had drawn me irrevocably into a world of passion, intimacy, and love that I had never imagined possible. He had driven me crazy, yes, but he had also shown me the depth of feeling, the intensity of connection, and the thrill of surrendering fully to someone who could match me in every way. And as I drifted into a restless, blissful sleep, his arms wrapped securely around me, I knew with certainty that the final chapter of our story was approaching, one that would test, thrill, and ultimately change us forever. The night had a different feel this time, heavier, charged with anticipation, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the culmination of everything we had shared. The city outside hummed softly, but inside the apartment, time seemed suspended, every sound, every breath, every heartbeat magnified. I felt the familiar flutter in my chest, the pulse of desire mingled with something deeper, something raw and irreversible. This was the night that would define us, the night where every promise, every stolen glance, every whispered word would either solidify into something eternal or leave us gasping in the aftermath of what had been. He appeared at the doorway, the soft glow of the room highlighting the sharp lines of his face, the intensity in his eyes, and the mischievous yet tender curve of his lips. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, the weight of unspoken thoughts filling the space between us. He stepped closer, deliberately, the floorboards creaking softly beneath his feet, and I felt my entire body respond before my mind could even process it. "Tonight," he whispered, his voice low and magnetic, "everything changes." That single sentence sent a shiver down my spine, not out of fear, but out of anticipation, and I realized with a thrill that I wanted nothing more than to see what everything truly meant. We moved through the apartment almost instinctively, the quiet intimacy between us more powerful than words could express. Every touch, every brush of fingers, every lingering gaze carried an intensity that was both thrilling and grounding. He led me to the balcony, the city lights stretched infinitely below us, and for a moment, we simply stood, letting the world fade into insignificance. The air was heavy with emotion, thick with desire, trust, and the shared understanding that what we had built together was unlike anything either of us had experienced before. "I've never felt like this before," he confessed softly, his hand brushing my cheek, thumb tracing the curve of my jaw. "And I don't want to imagine life without this, without you." His words struck deep into my chest, stirring emotions I had kept carefully hidden. I reached for his hand, entwining my fingers with his, feeling the warmth, the strength, the unspoken promise of permanence. And in that moment, I understood that this night was not just about desire or passion, it was about claiming, acknowledging, and embracing the love that had quietly, fiercely taken root in both our hearts. We sat together on the sofa, close enough that the heat of his body pressed against mine, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. Conversation dwindled to soft murmurs, sighs, and laughter that slipped effortlessly between us. The anticipation was palpable, but there was also a serenity, a quiet intimacy that underscored the intensity of what we felt. I realized then that desire alone could not explain this connection, it was far deeper, more profound. It was trust, surrender, and an unspoken promise that we were willing to explore the depths of one another completely, without hesitation or fear. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the walls, and with every glance, every touch, the tension coiled tighter, demanding release yet savoring the waiting. He leaned close, lips brushing my ear, whispering words that made my heart flutter and pulse race simultaneously. Every whisper, every touch, every look was a thread pulling us closer, weaving a tapestry of intimacy, passion, and connection that felt unbreakable. He had driven me crazy from the first night, yes, but now I understood the true extent of what he had done. He had opened a world of vulnerability, trust, and love that I had never dared to imagine, and he had done it effortlessly, irrevocably, beautifully. Hours passed in a seamless blend of laughter, soft murmurs, and quiet touches that carried a weight beyond comprehension. We were no longer two people exploring the edge of desire, we were intertwined in a way that was almost sacred, every heartbeat in rhythm, every sigh a declaration of the bond we had forged. There was a magic to the night, a sense that the universe itself had paused to watch, to acknowledge the rare, fierce, consuming connection that had grown between us. And I realized with a thrill and a deep, abiding certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. At the stroke of midnight, we found ourselves on the balcony once more, the city below a shimmering expanse of lights. He pulled me close, wrapping his arms securely around me, and I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion, joy, longing, trust, and the heady rush of love. "I need you to know," he whispered, voice trembling slightly with emotion, "that this, us, is everything to me. You've changed everything, and I can't imagine anything without you in it." I pressed my forehead to his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat, and knew that I felt the same, entirely and irrevocably. And then, in a moment suspended between time and eternity, he kissed me, not the teasing, exploratory kiss of the past, but a declaration, a surrender, a promise. It carried every feeling we had shared, every tension, every unspoken word, every heartbeat that had led to this moment. I responded instinctively, every part of me acknowledging that this was no longer just about passion or desire, it was about claiming, acknowledging, and embracing the love that had transformed both of us. The world outside faded, leaving only the two of us, entwined in a bond that was as exhilarating as it was enduring. As dawn approached, painting the city in soft, forgiving light, we remained together, silent but completely aware of the enormity of what we had experienced. There was a serenity in the aftermath, a quiet satisfaction, and a profound sense of certainty that we had crossed a threshold, one that would never allow us to return to the way things had been. Every moment, every touch, every whispered word had led us here, to a love that was consuming, transformative, and eternal. And I realized then, fully and completely, that I would follow him anywhere, into any chaos, into any uncertainty, because what we had was beyond comprehension, beyond expectation, and entirely worth it. The first night had promised madness, and it had delivered. The following days had intensified the passion, the desire, and the emotional connection, shaping us, transforming us, and driving us closer together than I had ever thought possible. And now, as we stood together on the balcony, watching the city awaken, I understood that what we shared was no longer fleeting or fragile. It was a love that demanded surrender, courage, and devotion, a love that was ours, entirely, irrevocably, and forever. He held me close, whispering my name softly as the first rays of sunlight brushed against our skin. And in that moment, I felt a completeness I had never known, a certainty that this story, our story, was only just beginning. Every promise, every glance, every heartbeat had led us here, and as we faced the future together, I knew that nothing could ever tear us apart. He had driven me crazy, yes, but he had also shown me the depths of love, trust, and surrender, leaving me forever changed. And as I rested in his arms, I smiled, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together, passion, love, madness, and all.